The narrow street echoes with the shuffling of feet, the clinking of armor, the murmur of a crowd that cannot avert its eyes. In a few minutes, 3 crosses will be raised on the hill that the inhabitants of Jerusalem call Golgotha, the place of the skull. We are in the Holy City at some moment between the years 30 and 33 of the Common Era, on a Friday morning preceding the Sabbath of the Jewish Passover. What happens in the next hours will divide human history into before and after. The sun has already passed the first hour. The spring morning light bathes the limestone walls that surround Jerusalem, that golden hue that gives the city its nickname of Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, Jerusalem of gold. But on this specific morning, the light seems harder. The air carries the weight of a sleepless night, of hurried judgments, of decisions that cannot be undone. The procession advances through the city, and Jerusalem, even witnessing the scene, continues breathing, because cities do not stop, because life goes on even when history is being written, and because almost no one there comprehends that they are living a moment that will be remembered by every coming generation. To understand what is passing this morning, it is necessary first to understand what Jerusalem was, not the Jerusalem of later imaginations, romanticized by centuries of European art, but the real, tangible, documentable Jerusalem, the city that archaeology unearths stone by stone. Before we begin, write in the comments where you are watching from. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. We continue. First-century Jerusalem is a city of violent contrasts. It rises upon hills, built on terraces that go up and down in steep slopes. Its streets are not the wide avenues of Rome or Alexandria. They are narrow alleys, many of them stairs hewn in the rock where 2 men can barely pass side by side. The walls of the houses almost touch over the heads of pedestrians, creating tunnels of shadow even in full day. Archaeological excavations in the so-called Herodian Quarter, in the upper part of the city, revealed residences of extreme sophistication. Mosaic floors, frescoes on the walls, mikvaot for ritual baths, crockery imported from Italy. This is the Jerusalem of the priests, of the Sadducee aristocrats, of the collaborators of Roman power. Mansions that look down upon the temple, with a privileged view of the rituals their owners control. But a few meters away, descending the slopes, the city changes completely. The lower city, where the majority of the population lives, is a tangle of modest constructions, artisans' workshops, noisy markets. The houses here are small, frequently of a single room, with low ceilings of wood and straw. Entire families share spaces that a Roman aristocrat would consider inadequate for a slave. On this Passover morning, the city is at the peak of its annual capacity. The historian Flavius Josephus, who was born only a few years after these events, records that during the pilgrimage festivals, the population of Jerusalem could multiply by 5 or even 10 times. Pilgrims from the entire Jewish diaspora, from Babylon, from Egypt, from Asia Minor, from Rome, from Greece, converge on the city. Tents cover the slopes of the Mount of Olives. The inns overflow. Local families rent out rooms, terraces, any available space. The air of the city in this season carries specific smells that later generations will forget. The aroma of unleavened bread, the matzah baking in hundreds of ovens, because during Passover, no leavened bread can exist in Jewish houses. The acrid smell of the smoke that rises constantly from the altar of the temple, where the sacrifices do not cease. The odor of animals piled in the market corrals, lambs destined for the paschal sacrifice that will happen this very afternoon. And under all this, the inevitable human smell of an ancient city without a modern sewage system, alleviated only partially by the drainage channels that archaeology revealed under the streets. The temple dominates everything, not only spiritually but physically. The structure that Herod the Great began to rebuild 4 decades earlier, and which is still not completely finished at this moment, is one of the architectural wonders of the ancient world. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder considered it the most notable building of the Orient. Its retaining walls, still visible today as the Western Wall, rise in stones so monumental that they seem impossible for human hands, some weighing more than 500 tons. From most points of the city, the gaze is inevitably drawn to the Temple Mount. The gold plates that cover the sanctuary's facade capture the morning light and reflect it with such intensity that, according to accounts of the time, it is physically painful to look directly at it when the sun is at the right angle. The gleaming white of the marble, the gold of the decorations, the successive courtyards that rise toward the Holy of Holies, everything was designed to impress, to humble the observer with the greatness of the God of Israel, and not coincidentally, with the power of the one who built this monument. But on this morning, the temple is also the setting of a specific tension. Passover celebrates the liberation from Egypt. It commemorates the moment when the people of Israel ceased to be slaves to be free. And here is the bitter irony that hangs over every celebration. Israel is again under foreign dominion. The Roman legions control the land. A Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, who is in the city precisely because of the festival, having come from his usual residence in Caesarea, represents the power of Caesar over the chosen people. The Roman military presence is ostentatious during the festivals. The Antonia fortress, built by Herod in the northwest corner of the Temple Mount, houses a cohort of soldiers, something between 400 and 800 men, specifically positioned to observe and, if necessary, intervene in any disturbance in the temple courtyard. The very name of the fortress, in honor of Mark Antony, is a reminder that this sacred place exists under the shadow of Rome. It is in this context that the procession advances. The path that leads from the Praetorium, be this Herod's palace in the upper part of the city or the Antonia fortress itself, since scholars debate the exact location, to the place of execution is not long in terms of distance, perhaps 600 meters, perhaps less. But on this morning, every meter is an eternity. Later tradition will call this route the Via Dolorosa. But none of those present use this name. For them, it is simply the path that leads outside the walls, where Rome executes its condemned. A path that has already been traversed by others before, and that would be traversed by thousands after, until the destruction of the city in 70 of the Common Era. The central condemned man carries the horizontal beam of the cross, the patibulum, as was Roman custom. The tradition of carrying the entire cross, popularized by medieval art, does not correspond to documented historical practice. The vertical post, the stipes, was generally already fixed at the place of execution, remaining as a permanent warning for those approaching the city. The patibulum, weighing between 30 and 40 kilograms, was carried by the condemned to the site, where it would then be hoisted and fixed to the post. The body under the timber has already undergone hours of torture. The Roman scourging and the flagrum, with its leather strips intertwined with pieces of bone or metal, was designed to reduce the victim to a state of shock but without killing him. Death was supposed to come later, publicly, pedagogically. The back, the shoulders, the legs bear the marks. The loss of blood is already significant, and now, upon these shoulders, the weight of the timber. The soldiers leading the procession are likely Syrian auxiliaries, not Roman legionaries proper. Rome rarely stationed complete legions in Judea. It preferred to use auxiliary troops recruited in the region. These men speak Greek and Aramaic besides Latin. They know the local customs. They know they are performing a job that their families in Caesarea or Sebaste would consider routine. Crucifixions were not rare events in the Roman Empire. The historian Josephus would record, decades later, that during the siege of Jerusalem, the Romans crucified 500 Jews a day until the wood ran out. For these soldiers, this is a morning of work. The crowd that watches is heterogeneous, like any urban crowd. There are the curious who stop because something is happening. There are those who need to pass and get irritated with the blockage of the way. There are the newly arrived pilgrims who barely understand what they are seeing. And there are those who know the condemned, those who followed him through Galilee, those who heard his words, saw his acts, believed in his promises. These are there, powerless, watching the crumbling of everything they hoped for. The Gospel of Luke specifically records the presence of women, and there followed him a great company of people, and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him. In the context of the 1st century, the specific mention of women is not casual. They were there. The text documents them because their presence was notable, because they remained when others fled. Among these women, the evangelical texts identify some by name: Mary of Magdala, Mary, mother of James and Joseph, Salome, and according to the Johannine tradition, the mother of the condemned himself, Mary. Each carries her own story, her own journey to this moment. But what the documentary can record is only what the eyes see: women in mourning, following at a distance, forbidden to intervene, unable to look away. The path passes through streets that archaeology still debates. The topography of Jerusalem changed dramatically after the destruction of 70 and the Roman Reconstruction as Aelia Capitolina. Layers of rubble and reconstructions altered the level of the streets, but some elements remain constant: the inclination of the terrain, the general direction to the north or northwest, where the hill of execution lay, the need to pass through a gate in the walls, because crucifixions happened outside the city walls. The sounds of this morning are specific and documentable: the shuffling of feet on stone, the metallic clinking of Roman armor, the cingulum with its bronze plates that beat against the thighs with every step, the murmur of the crowd, a mixture of Aramaic, Greek, perhaps liturgical Hebrew, from some pilgrim reciting psalms, the weeping of the women, and possibly the deliberate silence of the one who carries the timber. The synoptic Gospels record a detail that the Reconstruction cannot ignore. At some point on the route, the condemned can go no further. The body gives way. And the soldiers, pragmatic, do what soldiers do. They requisition help. A man is pulled from the crowd. The texts identify him: Simon of Cyrene, a city in present-day Libya, a Jew of the diaspora, likely in Jerusalem for Passover. The Gospel of Mark adds a detail suggesting that this man later became known in the early Christian community: father of Alexander and Rufus. The fact that the sons are named indicates that the first readers knew who they were. This man, torn from his paschal pilgrimage, now carries the instrument of death of a stranger, not by choice, but by military order. The Romans had this right: the Angaria, the forced requisition of service. The same system mentioned in the Sermon on the Mount: if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. The procession continues. Golgotha in Aramaic, Calvary in the Latin translation of cranium, was not a majestic hill. Archaeology and topography suggest a modest elevation, possibly an old abandoned quarry whose exposed rock vaguely resembled the shape of a skull. It lay outside the walls, as required both by Roman law and by Jewish sensibility regarding ritual impurity, but sufficiently close so that the execution fulfilled its pedagogical function. Anyone entering or leaving the city by the north gate would see the bodies on the timbers. The site that tradition today identifies as Golgotha, inside the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre, was identified by the mother of Emperor Constantine, Helena, in the early 4th century. Archaeological excavations confirm that this area was indeed outside the city walls in the Second Temple period, and that it was used as a quarry and cemetery, consistent with the evangelical accounts that mention a new tomb nearby. When the procession arrives, the scene is already prepared. The vertical posts are fixed in the rocky ground. The holes where they fit were hewn in the stone. There is no solemnity in the place. There is no elaborate ritual. Roman crucifixion was designed to be an industrial execution, repeatable, efficient. The soldiers do their work with the routine competence of those who have done this many times. The other 2 condemned are already there or arrive in the same group. The Gospels identify them only by their category. They are lestai, a Greek term that can mean thieves, but which Josephus frequently uses to describe rebels and insurgents. Zealots, perhaps, men who took up arms against Rome. Crucifixion was the punishment reserved for slaves and for crimes against the state: sedition, rebellion, piracy. That these men are being executed together with someone accused of claiming to be king of the Jews is consistent with Roman logic. The plaque that Pilate ordered fixed, the titulus, declares the accusation: Iesvus Nazarenes rex ivdei orviem, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Written in 3 languages, according to the Gospel of John: Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, or Aramaic. the language of power, the lingua franca of the Mediterranean, the language of the local people, so that no one could claim not to understand. The hour approaches. The soldiers offer what seems to be a gesture of mercy, wine mixed with myrrh or gall, a rudimentary analgesic that would dull the senses and alleviate the agony approaching. The condemned refuses. The Gospels record this detail without explaining it. Perhaps consciousness was more important than comfort. Perhaps there were words still to be said. Those present, those who stayed, watch from where they can. The women, at a distance. Some disciples, perhaps, hidden in the crowd. The curious who came to watch as one watches any public spectacle. The guards doing their duty, and the city in the background, indifferent, preparing for the paschal sacrifice that will happen in a few hours. The contrast is violent and deliberate. In the temple, priests prepare knives for the blood of lambs. Outside the walls, soldiers prepare nails for wood and human flesh. What later theology will connect, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, at this moment is only temporal coincidence for the observer. The last moments before the crucifixion proper are of technical preparation. The clothes of the condemned are removed. Crucifixion was deliberately humiliating, exposing the naked or semi-naked body to the gazes of all. The soldiers divide the garments among themselves, as was their right. The Gospel of John specifically mentions a seamless tunic, woven from top to bottom, for which they cast lots instead of tearing it. The sky of Jerusalem on this morning is likely clear, as it usually is in the Levantine spring. The Hamzin, the hot desert wind that sometimes blows at this time, may be present or not. The texts do not mention it. What they mention is that at some moment in the next hours, something will happen with the light. Darkness in full day, the synoptics record, a phenomenon that later scholars will try to explain as an eclipse, sandstorm, or event without natural explanation. But that is still to come. Now, at this exact moment that the Reconstruction documents, everything is in position. The horizontal timber is on the ground, ready to receive the body. The nails, archaeological discoveries like the pierced talus of Yehohanan found in a first-century ossuary in Jerusalem, confirm the use of nails, are in the hands of the executioners. The two other condemned wait or have already been hoisted. The crowd is present, but not unanimous. Some mock as they would mock any failed messianic pretender, and there were several before and after. Others lament, others simply watch without knowing what they feel, without comprehending what they witness. And the women remain. The biblical text records that they watched from afar. The distance was likely imposed by the soldiers, who maintained a perimeter around the execution site. But it was also the distance of one who cannot get closer because the pain is unbearable, and cannot leave because love is stronger than pain. The sounds now are different from the sounds of the city. Out here, there is less urban murmur. The wind may bring fragments of activity from the market near the walls. There is the sound of the soldiers' tools, and there are, or will be soon, other sounds that the Gospels record, but that the Reconstruction documents only as possibility. Words pronounced from the height of the cross. The third hour, approximately 9 in the morning by modern calculation, marks, according to the Gospel of Mark, the moment of elevation. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke mention that the darkness begins at the 6th hour and lasts until the 9th, indicating that death occurs several hours later. The process was designed to be slow. Crucifixion killed not by blood loss or by the wounds of the nails, but by gradual asphyxiation combined with shock, exhaustion, and exposure. It could last days. But the Reconstruction documents this specific moment, this threshold, the instant when the body is positioned, the nails pierce, the timber is hoisted, and then it happens. The cross is raised. The horizontal timber fits into the vertical, the body hangs, the weight falls upon the fixation points, and the final countdown begins of a life that, to those present, seemed to have ended in failure, and that for billions of people in the following generations would mark the central moment of the history of salvation. Jerusalem continues its routine below in the streets, in the markets, in the temple. The pilgrims prepare their lambs. The priests organize the shifts of sacrifice. The families arrange the rooms for the Paschal Supper. The world keeps turning. But here, on this stony hill outside the walls, something has changed. What exactly changed would be debated, interpreted, proclaimed, and contested for 2 millennia. Religions would form around this moment. Empires would adopt it as a symbol. Wars would be fought in its name. Art would be created to represent it. And billions of human beings, across cultures and centuries, would find in this event meaning for their lives, hope for their deaths, structure for their societies. None of this is visible at this moment. What is visible is a man on a cross between 2 others, outside the walls of an occupied city, on a Friday morning preceding a religious festival. And women who watch, and soldiers who divide clothes, and a crowd that does not know it is witnessing the most documented, most represented, most debated event of human history. The morning continues. The hours will pass. Words will be spoken. 7 phrases, according to the tradition that harmonizes the Gospels. Darkness will come. The final moment will arrive. The body will be taken down before sunset because the Sabbath approaches and Jewish law forbids bodies to remain exposed during the holy day. And then Sunday will come. But that is another documentary. What the Reconstruction records is this moment of transition, the threshold between what was and what would be, the instant when the timber was raised and the world unknowingly changed eras. The locations remain. The traditional hill of Golgotha, protected today by marble and incense inside the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre. The empty tomb, a few meters away, object of continuous veneration since the 4th century. The stones of Jerusalem that still echo the steps of pilgrims who retrace the path. The texts remain. 4 Gospels written between 30 and 70 years after the events. Letters of Paul, some of them earlier than the Gospels themselves, already proclaiming the death and resurrection as the center of the faith. Mentions in pagan historians, Tacitus, Pliny, Josephus, that confirm the historical existence and the execution under Pilate. The memory remains. On every Good Friday, in every corner of the planet, communities recall this morning. In Eastern and Western liturgies, in Gregorian chants and African spirituals, in Quaker silence and Philippine processions, the morning that happened once is relived infinite times. And the question remains. The same question that hung over the crowd that morning, which no one there knew how to formulate completely. If this was just another failed messianic pretender, and there were dozens before and after, why was this one different? Why did this event, among so many, split history in 2? The Reconstruction does not answer questions of faith. It only documents what can be documented. A city, a mourning, a procession, an execution, people who watch, women who weep, soldiers who work, and a cross raised against the sky of Jerusalem. The rest, the meaning, the theology, the hope, is what each of us, 2,000 years later, decides to do with this moment. If this documentary illuminated your understanding of sacred history, subscribe to the channel. Activate notifications. Each episode is a journey to the past to understand the present. Leave in the comments, what other biblical moments would you like to see reconstructed? Share with those who seek to know the history behind the faith. Until the next Reconstruction.